The hot seat session never aired. Mr. Robineau destroyed the tape. Of course, that didn't stop every moment of it from being reported. In fact, most of the students knew about it by the time school opened the next day. What I recall then, when the last detail had been spilled, is a period of whispers and waiting. Tension. What would happen now? Would the jury's open hostility spill over into the classrooms? How would Stargirl react? Answers were expected on the following day, Valentine's Day. On previous holidays, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Groundhog Day, Stargirl had left a little something on each desk in her homeroom. Would she do likewise this time? The answer was yes. Each member of homeroom number 17 found a candy heart on his or her desk that morning. There was a basketball game that night. That I do remember. The biggest game of the year. The Electrons had breezed through the regular season undefeated, but now the second season was about to begin. The playoffs. First the districts, then the regionals, and finally the state tournament. We had never made it to the districts, but now visions of championship danced in our head. The Electrons, champions of all Arizona. We would settle for nothing less. First hurdle in our way was Sun Valley, champions of the Pima League. The game was played Valentine's night on a neutral court in Casa Grande. All of Micah, it seemed, emptied out and headed for the game. Kevin and I went in the pickup. From the moment the Micah mob entered the gym, our cheers rattled the rafters. The big green M on Stargirl's white sweater flounced as she spun and leaped with the other cheerleaders. I spent as much time watching her as I did watching the game. She cheered when we scored. When Sun Valley scored, she did not. Something inside me felt better. But not for long. We were losing. For the first time all year, we were tailing at the end of the first quarter. In fact, we were getting smoked, 21-9. The reason was no mystery. While Sun Valley's team was not as good as ours, they did have one thing we did not, a superstar. A kid named Ron Kovac. He stood 6'8" and averaged 30 points per game. Our players looked like 5 Davids flailing against Goliath. Sun Valley's lead had increased to 19 points midway through the second quarter. Our once raucous fans were stunned into silence. And that's when it happened. The ball was loose in the middle of the floor. Several players from each team dived for it. At that moment, Kovac was running past, trying to avoid the divers. His right foot came down on a prone player's sneaker, so it was told in the newspapers the next day. At the time, it happened so fast no one saw it, though several people said they heard a snickering crack, like a twig snapping. We all knew that suddenly Goliath was on the floor, writhing and screaming, and his right foot looked all wrong. And the Sun Valley coaches and trainer and players were sprinting across the floor. But they were not the first. Stargirl somehow was already there. While Kovac's own cheerleaders sat gaping and stricken on their bench, Stargirl knelt on the hardwood floor. She held his head in her lap while the others attended his broken leg. Her hands moved over his face and forehead. She seemed to be saying things to him. While they carried him away on a stretcher, she followed. Everyone, both sides, stood and applauded. The Sun Valley cheerleaders leapt as if he had just scored 2 points. Ambulance lights flashed in the high windows. I knew why I was applauding, but I was wondering about some of the other Micah fans. Were they really standing in tribute? Or because they were happy to see him go? The game resumed. Stargirl returned to the cheerleaders' bench. Without Kovac, Sun Valley was a pushover. By early in the second half, we took the lead and went on to win easily. 2 nights later, we lost to Glendale. Again, we fell farther and farther behind as the first half went on, but this time there was no turnaround in the second half. This time the Electrons faced not 1, but 5 players better than themselves. This time there was no opponent broken ankle, though I'm sure in our desperation some of us secretly wished for it. We were shocked. We couldn't believe it. And then, as the seconds of the fourth quarter ticked by, we did believe. The cheers from across the gym were like volleys of arrows piercing our grand illusion. How could we have been so stupid? Did we really think that little Micah, undefeated in its own third-rate league, could ever stand up to big city powerhouses across the state? We had been lured into a great, foolish expectation. Suckered. We were devastated. It had been so wonderful to be winners, and so right for us. Winning, we had come to believe, was our destiny. And now, as the Glendale coach sent in the scrubs to mop us up, the Micah girls wept. Boys cursed and booed. Some blamed the officials, or the nets, or the lights. The cheerleaders, to their credit, kept on cheering. They looked up at us with glistening eyes and mascara tracks on their cheeks. They pumped their arms and shouted and did everything that cheerleaders are supposed to do, but their gestures were empty. Their hearts were not in it. Except for Stargirl. As I watched her intently, I can see that she was different. Her cheeks were dry. There was no crack in her voice, no sag in her shoulders. From the start of the second half, she never sat down. And she never again looked at the game. She turned her back on the court. She stood and faced us and gave not an ounce of herself to the jubilation across the gym. We were losing by 30 points, with a minute to go, but she cheered on as if we had a chance. Her eyes blazed with ferocity I had never seen before. She shook her fists at us. She flung her defiance at our gloom. And then her face was bloody. A Glendale player had just dunked the ball, and Kevin pounded my knee with his fist. And I looked to see Stargirl's face suddenly with a bloody mask, and I was on my feet screaming, "No!" But it wasn't blood. It was a tomato. Someone had splattered her face with a perfectly thrown ripe tomato, and as the clock expired, and as Glendale fans poured into the court, Stargirl just stood there, her great eyes staring up at us in utter bewilderment through the pulpy red gore. Sprouts of bitter laughter erupted among us, and even some applause. The next morning at home, I found the card. It was in a school notebook that I had apparently not opened for several days. It was a Valentine. One of those little cut-out third-grade sorts, showing a blushing little boy and a girl with Mary Jane shoes and a big red heart between them, and the words, "I love you." And as third graders, and high schoolers often do, the sender had signed in a note. I don't know if it's going to show. Just a little note. And that was chapter 14. A star and a girl. I mean, in case you didn't know who the note was from. Yeah. So apparently they didn't like her cheering very much. Can you imagine, like, somebody's aim actually hitting you in the face with a fucking tomato? It's nuts. Hi. You think so? You think Stargirl's gonna go full carry? I don't know about that. Do you think she seems the type?